Assalamu alaikum, brothers and sisters. We welcome you all from IMA's on IMA's platform. This is an event which will talk about the spiritual aspects of psychiatry, particularly in current lockdown. I start the program and I invite Dr. Abdul Qari Shafiq for Quran recitation. Thank you.
أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. خلق الإنسان من صلصال كالفخار وخلق الجن من مارج من نار فبأي آلاء ربكما تكذبان رب المشرقين ورب المغربين فبأي آلاء ربكما تكذبان مرج البحرين يلتقيان بينهما برزخ لا يبغيان فبأي آلاء ربكما تكذبان يخرج منهما اللؤلؤ والمرجان فبأي آلاء ربكما تكذبان صدق الله العظيم. No translation. He created man from wringing clay light that of a pot thread, and created the jinns from the flame of the fire. So which of the bounties of your Lord will you both belie? Lord of the two easts and two west. So which of the bounties of your Lord will you both belie? He had made the two seas to flow, looking joined. Between them is a barrier that one cannot cross the other. So which of the bounties of your Lord will you both belie? From both of them emerged the pearl and the coral. So which of the bounties of your Lord will you both belie? Sadaqallahu al-azim wa akhiru da'wan alhamdulillahi rabbil alamin.
Jazakallah khair, Qari Abdul Shafi, for the beautiful recitation. Thank you. I now invite our host of the event, Dr. Javeria Shoaib, who's a psychiatry training coach and mentor in personal development, and she has special interest in women's spiritual well-being. Dr. Javeria Shoaib, please, I'll hand over the mic to you. Thanks.
Dr. Nader Hafiz. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuhu. Welcome to this very important session on mental health arranged by Australian Islamic Medical Association, IMA. Mental health is a very important topic, and it is a very important aspect of a person's well-being. Yet, we know that people in general have a very limited understanding of mental health issues, and there are a lot of negative concepts among public and general population associated with mental health. So we really need to talk about mental health and another very interesting aspect of it, which is the spiritual aspects of mental health. It is very commendable of IMA to arrange this important session on mental health for the general public and especially for the Muslim community. To begin with, I would like to invite Dr. Asif Raza, who is the president of IMA New South Wales chapter. Dr. Asif Raza is a consultant intensive care medicine and anesthetics and Blacktown and Nepean hospitals, and he's also a senior lecturer at Western Sydney University. And as I mentioned, that Dr. Asif Raza is the president of IMA New South Wales chapter. Dr. Asif Raza, please let us know about IMA, what IMA is.
Assalamu alaikum. Thank you very much, Dr. Javeria. Thank you very much for inviting me. And assalamu alaikum, my dear audience. It is an honor and a pleasure to speaking with you on this evening. Lockdown has affected all of us in New South Wales in one way or another, more so in New South Wales and Victoria than the other states. But it has affected every single person. Lockdown, alhamdulillah, is going to be eased soon, but it will bring some unknown challenges. And one of the challenges we suspect, and we have spoken to health professionals, they think that anxiety and depression for various reasons is very common. Alhamdulillah, has increased in these days. So we thought Australian Islamic Medical Association, which is an organization of Muslim doctors and allied health professionals, we are working for you. We're working for our community. We are working to inspire and unite all medical health professionals to serve our profession and our community better. Australian health professionals, they are doing a commendable job at the moment, but we thought Muslim health professionals, they are scattered around Australia and New Zealand, and Australian Islamic Medical Association was organized to unite all of those medical health professionals and use their abilities and their strengths to serve our wider Australian community. So IMA is for you. We are working for you. Inshallah, together we will bring many more programs which will help our Australian community, inshallah. Thank you very much, Dr. Javeria.
Thank you, Dr. Nader. And thank you for arranging this very important session on mental health, which is also a very important aspect. And now moving on to the main speech of the session tonight. While mental health in general is a very important issue, during the lockdown, I think it has become one of the biggest challenges faced by Australian community. And in Australia, we are experiencing the longer and the latest lockdown as compared to the rest of the world. So in the beginning, people were very, very anxious. and there was hopelessness. People were thinking, is it going to end? What is going to happen? People were scared as well. And then as it moved on, there was an increasing frustration, a lot of anxiety associated with that. So it was very draining for a lot of people, and it was really draining for a lot of people. And we were thinking that it started eroding our coping resources. So while it is very important to talk about it, and now that we are at the verge of end of lockdown, inshallah, we're all hoping that it is going to ease, inshallah, then there is a talk around, will a lot of people be triggered by the ease of restrictions? And there is a question that it is not going to be easy for a lot of people, especially for those who are having mental health issues. So there is a chance of anxiety for them. So there are a lot of questions around how to manage our mental health, check our own mental health and those of our loved ones and our family, and also how do we deal with re-entering into the normal world, which was the pre-lockdown world. The other question is, how is spirituality and how is religion helping mental health of people? So there are a lot of questions. Do we need a special help from a professional point of view for our mental health issues, like from psychiatry or for psychology, while we're all Muslims? And is Islam or spirituality is going to help with our mental health issues? So there are a lot of questions. There is a lot of things that can be said, and I'm hoping that our speaker is going to shed light on all those questions. So I'm going to invite our honorable speaker for this session, for this talk, feeling down in lockdown, Dr. Umar Sharif. Dr. Umar Sharif is a consultant neuropsychiatrist. He's a member of Royal College of Psychiatry, Psychiatrist UK, and he's also a fellow of Royal Australian New Zealand College of Psychiatrists. He is a researcher in acquired brain injury rehabilitation, functional neurological, and movement disorders. Dr. Sharif is an admirer of the psychological aspects in Islamic teachings and values. So I'm going to invite Dr. Umar Sharif to please enlighten us on this topic. Dr. Umar Sharif. And I also wanted to tell the audience that we are going to take your questions after the talk, but please keep your mic mute, and please, we will only accept written questions. So you can write your questions in the chat box, and we will take them after this talk. Dr. Umar Sharif.
Thank you. Thank you, Dr. Jabaria. Let me just start the screen. So, أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Sorry, I was caught up with a few things, so I could not make it on time. I apologize for the inconvenience. But alhamdulillah, we started on time. So thanks, Dr. Jabaria. Your introduction was pitch perfect. You set the scene very well. I appreciate that. So that's going to make my task easier, alhamdulillah. So that's, having said that, special thanks and jazakumullahu khairan for Imaa, especially Imaa NSW, for initiating this series. I really hope we have just started the series of mental health related programs and activities, which is going to happen in this platform in the coming days, inshallah, which will benefit everyone. So the particular topic is about, in terms of the lockdown and post-lockdown, we are nearly touching down the post-lockdown time. And how can we, in a way, use faith-based principle? In our case, we are using Islamic principles. And how can we use that to our advantage to help us in terms of overcoming stress, worries, and griefs, and which is in relation and directly in relation to lockdown pandemic, and in terms of life skills in general. So if you kind of a disclaimer, this session is to help the general public in providing useful tips in managing anxiety, stress, and worries during the pandemic and post-lockdown through faith-based principles. This course does not replace you seeking for help from experts in the field. So that's the clear message. This is for general public. So some of the information given in this is very, very basic and simple for the general public to understand it. And in no way this is going to replace seeking professional or experts help. So just the impact of COVID-19 pandemic in particular. We have gone through this lockdown, especially state of Victoria, New South Wales being the case as well, and some of the other states as well. Alhamdulillah, Queensland, where I am at the moment, being relatively very, very blessed, one of the blessed part in the world, I guess, at the moment. So the effects of the lockdown, quarantine, isolation, the effects of the worrying, negative mental state or mind state, concerns about future and things like that. So it sets a different, it primes the brain in a certain way. So the brain takes a huge portion of the time in thinking about all these negative things. So it is a very difficult time, to say the least. Life after lockdown, there is business around the world being shut down. People have lost jobs. It's not about occupational burnout anymore. It's about job security and financial stability. Before, it was a lot of agoraphobia, social anxiety, but now it has almost led to dealing with loneliness and concern for the safety of the loved ones. And post-lockdown, because people have been socially isolated for a long time, it can trigger some SAD, social anxiety disorders, and anxiety related to going back, leaving home from the comfort zone and things like that. That's something the experts and pundits are worried about post-lockdown time. So anxiety about life after lockdown itself, and some of them still worried about politicians lifting lockdown too early, which can increase the rate of infection. Do we have the healthcare system to sustain the sudden increase of the infection? Many worry about returning to a more normal life. It is post-COVID, it is a kind of a new normal. Shall we go back to the BC era, which is the before COVID era? We are basically into the after COVID era. So there are many things have become new normal now. Some lose confidence in things not done for a long time, being on a lockdown. So we are not used to go back and do things which we used to do before with confidence. So now without doing it, there will be a hit in the level of confidence. Just to go into the topic, what is true health? True health is, the Western world, the true health is taken into two different paradigms, which is the mind and the body. And the important third domain is often been missed in the Western world, which in my opinion is the ruh, the spirit. So it is the synchrony, the orchestration, the exact or balancing of mind, body, and spirit, which gives the true health. That's what makes the true health. But without considering the effects and the domains of the spirit, the ruh, I doubt true health could be reached, because Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala created the body and the ruh, and the body is with the mind as well. So without that, in terms of coming to the exact orchestration, if we're not able to come into the balancing act of all three domains, we will not be able to reach true health. That's in my humble opinion. Moving on, what is mental health? An overview. We'll start with an overview, then we slowly go into the topic as well. What is mental health? Sometimes people get confused asking mental health. Like, for example, hey, how are you? Physical health. People will be very happy and gracefully, with thanks, they will say, hey, I'm fine. Thanks for asking about my health. But if you ask, how's your mental health today? Oh my God, that's going to start a war. So that's, but people don't understand. It's like the physical health. So that's important to people to understand, the general public to understand. Mental health refers to our emotional and psychological state, our social well-being, and how we feel about ourselves and how we interact with the external world. When we have good mental health, we have resilience. We can think about plan A. If plan A fails, we can think about plan B. We can be more resilient. We are more energetic to face the life challenges and stresses, have meaningful relationship, and make sound decisions. It is very important to maintain a good relationship at home and outside home, at work, especially as Muslims who are living in a very interesting time. It is very important. The social quotient or the emotional intelligence is very important, and that's where the mental health maintains it. It is just as important as physical health, but unfortunately that's been slammed down as a secondary anything. It's a sidelined at many levels, unfortunately, mental health. Is mental health versus mental illness? Often when we ask people how's your mental health, it's often been taken in the connotation of mental illness because of the taboo, because of the social stigma attached with it. But it's not the same. Mental health is like having a physical health and physical illness. That's where the problem, the pathology comes in. But as a health, it is as a physical health. So mental illness is not something the person can overcome by willpower. So mental illness is real, and it cannot be just overcome with just by willpower. Many of the traditional or cultural beliefs are that the mental illness can be overcome with willpower. If you're a man, you can overpower it. So that's not true. It can be caused by biological factors. It can be genetic, or it can have some neurochemical disbalances. It could be from the trauma or abuses on the childhood. It could be from the adverse childhood events. It could be from a dysfunctional family or from a genetic loading from a family history of mental illness. So there are various reasons one could have a mental illness, which we know of. So mental health is different from mental illness. So that's just two distinct entities. Mental health is like any other health. It's about keeping our emotional health at a stable level so that we can function to our best level and advantage. Okay, so how common is mental illness? Mental illness is getting very common. And the mental illness burden is also increasing day to day as well. It's roughly around 1 billion people have suffered from some sort of mental illness. So it's 1 in 7, like 7.6 billion people. Out of that 1 billion, close to 1 billion suffer from mental health related issues. Anxiety is the most common in the world, affecting close to 300 billion people. That's roughly close to America's population. And then, which is followed by depression. But anxiety, as commonly we clinicians know, it is underreported and a condition, yet it is almost like 300 million people have depression, anxiety. Globally, mental illness affects more females than males because of various reasons, because of the physical and the hormonal things, social constructs, things like that. Australia, in particular, the Australian Bureau of Statistics survey estimated around 5 million Australians, close to 4.8 million, which is 20%, which is 1 in 5 Australians have a mental or behavioral condition, which is in 2018 stats, by the way. It could be worse, perhaps, once we have the stats coming out after or post-lockdown period, I guess. So it's quite significant, and it is increasing. And it is important, as we know, understanding and identification is half of the treatment done. So understanding of this condition is very important to identify it. So just go to the next big thing. The stress is a kind of a buzzword. It's a kind of a big thing, which we all heard about. The stress has been attributed to everything and all things at the moment, which is not true. Stress is a feeling that people have when they are overloaded and struggling to cope with demands. The feeling of being under too much of emotional pressure. People have different ways of reacting to stress. So a situation that feels stressful to one person may be motivating to someone else, but it is a spectrum. It is not it's not a very dichotomous, it's very spectrumous. So some people might find a level could be very stressful, but for others it could be very motivating. But to a larger degree, stress is stressful to everyone. Hope that makes sense. How can we simplify stress? It's something like S is equal to P, which is over R. It's like Einstein's theory, but so that's simplifying in a way. Stress is equal to stress. If the stress if the pressure or the demand is more than your resources, that's what brings the stress. If you have the demand less than the resources, if you're capable for it. For example, if I've been asked to present today about Bitcoin, for example, or even cardiology and things like that, I would be very stressful. I have no clue about it. So that's what it is. If you don't have the resources and you're trying to apply it, and then that brings enormous stress upon oneself. The stress, a couple of the physiological and the issues happens in the body as well as in the mind. It comes in different forms and it comes in different degrees as well. For example, from headaches to being tired or having some kind of bloatiness, to having some kind of worrying sensation, having negative thoughts, forgetfulness, sleep disturbances more often, feeling a bit clumsy, irritable, and things like that. So the stress can bring out most of these symptoms, and there are more symptoms can come up as well. Zebra, it's a beautiful animal. We all admire it. And zebras have unique stripes as well. They come up with the stripes which are very unique, and no two zebras have similar stripes like our fingerprints. Mashallah, it's a beautiful creation of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And what is zebra doing here? Just anecdotally, the stripes of zebra can come out if zebra becomes stressed as well. It's just an anecdote. Moving on, is all stress bad? No, there are some stress which are positive stress as well. If you look at the vertical red line and the horizontal red line, the vertical red line gives the performance from low to high, and the horizontal gives the low to high stress levels. A certain level of stress is good to improve our alert state, to improve our performance levels. So optimal stress, what we call it as optimal stress, can lead to optimal performance. But anything more than that can lead to excess worries, and it can make a dysfunction and can be counterproductive in terms of performance. So this is to achieve this bell-shaped, nice green curve, it has to have an optimal stress to reach that peak of the performance. That's about the positive stress. Grief and worry is part of life. Period of grief and worry are a normal part of life. This can be cured with 3 Ps, like prayer, patience, and positive thinking. We'll talk about this prayer, patience, and positive thinking as we go along. However, sometimes we inadvertently nurture negative feelings too much and develop an anxiety or a depressive disorder. So this is all part of grief and worry. There is no one in this world does not have grief or worries. So it's part and parcel of our life. So moving on, we talked about stress. Now we are moving to the next bigger topic, what is anxiety? A feeling of unease, like a worry or a fear that can be mild to severe. It's like feeling anxious from time to time. It usually passes once the situation is over. It can make our heart race or difficult to breathe, some kind of tremors, sweatiness. It also changes in our behavior, such as becoming overly careful. You see that the little bit of stress which becomes anxiety, it can affect the way we can deliver, to the point we start avoiding it. And so the anxiety can push it up for avoidance as well. And because that becomes a trigger to anxiety, and we try to avoid the anxiety by avoiding, which brings the anxiety. Which in a way makes us dysfunctional in demonstrating our ability. What is anxiety? Moving on, when anxiety becomes a problem, our worries can be out of proportion with relatively harmless situation. Even harmless situation, our worries could be out of proportion, irrational. It can feel more intense or overwhelming and interfere with our everyday lives and relationship. It can make us dysfunctional, or it can bring distress to our day-to-day life. The tips in this session may help manage feeling of anxiety However, if your anxiety affecting your daily life or causing your distress, you should seek further professional support. Body's normal response, the fight and flight approach. These are called as the stress hormones. When you flight, the cortisol is pumped into it. When you fight, the adrenaline comes into it. This is the usual response we see. When you see something which your brain picks it up as something, for example, if you're in a dark area, you're passing by, you see it, you hear a voice, and then there's some cat comes out of it. Then your brain understands, hey, cat, it shouldn't cause that harm to you. So you basically, you will be ready, you will be still passing through that galley. If in case you have to fight, you can fight it up. What if there is a big cat comes out of it? If a tiger or a lion comes out, you're not going to fight it. You're going to look for the easy exit. And that's how our brain works. So it's fight and flight. There's a third domain as well, which is called as freeze. But for this particular discussion, I'm not going to talk about that. So neurobiology of anxiety, how does the brain perceives what is something we could actually deal with it and what's something we can't deal with it. So if you look at the prefrontal cortex, this is the part which is inside our head, alhamdulillah, and outside our head, the eyes are here, and the eyes pick up the vision, and it's like a camera, it captures it, it puts this image in the back of the eye, and which actually translates into the visual cortex, which is our back of our head, the occipital region of the brain, which is the brain's eye, the visual cortex. That's where the whole vision is interpreted. So the eyes basically catches it, but the interpretation happens in the back of our head. And from there, it goes into the what process or the where process. And so it goes back into the emotional processing part of the brain, which is what we call it as the midbrain or the amygdala mainly, where the emotions are processed. So this is where it is. And if we have a previous encounter with relating to certain things, which has resulted in a negative neuroplasticity, by which I mean some kind of traumatic or distressing memory attached to that particular thing, then the brain is going to panic. The brain is going to tell, hey, you have to run around, you have to avoid it. So the brain wants to protect us. It is basically part of the survival mechanism. The brain wants to protect us, but it gets into an overprotective mode, which becomes a counterprotective for us. Counterproductive for us. And eventually it becomes, unfortunately, a pathoplasticity, resulting in a disorder. But if the brain is able to, with some things which we have encountered and we manage to actually work around it, then it gets into the prefrontal cortex, which is the thinking part of the brain, which is where the thinking process happens. And then it says, if the cat comes out, the brain is saying, oh, this is something we can handle it. That's okay, I can pass around it. So that's where the thinking brain and the emotional brain go simultaneously. But sometimes the emotional brain take over the thinking brain. That's where the anxiety overtakes us, and it can lead to distress and dysfunction and avoidance and so on as well. That's a nutshell. There's more into it, but that's a nutshell. So moving on, that's the last bit. What is depression? Depression is a common mental health problem. People come and say, I'm being depressed. But it is not just a symptom, it's a syndrome. It is a group of symptoms which is called a syndrome. And it has to be a clinical syndrome, by which I mean that a couple of criteria for that. And it has to be a certain period of time, at least for 2 weeks, and it has to be persistent and pervasive as well. Not just having in the morning and everything fine by the evening, and for the next 2 days all goes hunky-dory, and then somebody becomes down in themselves. That's not really depression. So emotional. There are emotional domains, which is low mood, emptiness, resentments, anxiety, guilt and shame, or motivation issues, apathy, loss of energy, interest, motivation to get and go, but becomes very hard. Things seems to be pointless and hopeless. Cognitively, which are not necessarily the long-term memories and things like that, but the cognitive domains of difficulty to concentrate, difficult to sustain focus, negative ideas by the self, which is called as cognitive distortions, and the world and the future. Behavior, low word activity, social withdrawals, it can be agitation or retardation. And biological, if you have sleep issues, appetite, because of that you can weight issues, changes in the circadian rhythms, which is the wake sleep cycle, and changes in the brain chemicals, which we're going to talk about it. So we talked about stress, we talked about anxiety, we talked about depression. Now the question is stress and depression the same? The answer is no. Stress is not depression, but vulnerability plus prolonged stress can lead to depression. Not necessarily equal to, just for the optics of the slide I put as equal to, but can lead to depression. So stress is different, anxiety is different, depression is different, but they can coexist sometimes, or most of the times. Mystery. The mystery is sometimes when people, especially Muslims, and some culture, some people from Indian subcontinent mainly, who I've encountered a lot, and they talk about as if there is depression is not existence. It's depression, especially for men, especially for Muslim men, it's not something they should have. The mystery of depression is not that it exists, but on its denial. The mind, like any other organ, is prone to malfunction. Instead, the paradox of depression has long been its prevalence. Obsessed with our pain, we'll retreat from everything. We'll stop eating unless we start eating too much, which is called as comfort eating, when we feel too down and upset. Pleasures will lose its appeal. Sleep will become a frustrating pursuit. You can't sleep, you're awake, wide-eyed, staring at the ceiling when the whole world is sleeping around you, but you can't sleep. It becomes a frustrating pursuit. We'll always be tired, even though we'll do less and less. Because of the lack of motivation, we're not doing anything, but yet tired, because the brain is not prepared to face the next day. We'll think a lot about the end. People think about self-harm and suicide and things like that. Depression is real. Depression is definitely real. We talked about the prefrontal cortex, which is almost 1/3 of the brain, which is the thinking part of the brain. That makes us to be different from other creations. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala blessed us with prefrontal cortex, which is blessed with billions and billions of neurons in the prefrontal area, which makes us to think, which makes us to plan, which makes us to organize, which makes us to make the right decision, which makes us to forward plan, which makes us to concentrate and work on our social emotions and things like that, which is where the prefrontal cortex works out. If you look at this is the nuclear scan, especially it's a SPECT scan, which actually shows it's also called as a functioning scan, functional brain image, rather than the structural, which is the MRI and CT, but this goes into looking at the functioning level to a degree. So if you look at the healthy, which is on the left side on the screen, which you can see the red color, which shows it is well vascularized and the metabolism is good. Red is it shows that it's doing good. But if it goes down like yellow, green, it's okay. But then it further goes down into blues and blacks. That's where the metabolism and the vascularization is not right. So if you look at the chronic depression, which is on the right side of the brain, you can see the difference there. There's no metabolism in the prefrontal cortex. It's very little. That's which helps us to think, which makes us to forward plan, which makes us to make right decisions in life. And that's not working. So no wonder people would feel down in themselves, finding it difficult to get and go in terms of motivation, to look at the world the way they look at when they have the brain like this. So it is significant changes what we are looking at. So there are significant changes noted in the brain metabolism and cerebral blood flow between a healthy and depressed person. And the neurochemical changes happen. These are happy chemicals, dopamine, serotonin, and norepinephrine. So when these are not there, when there is a disbalance in them, then it can lead to changes, and we can't perceive things happy even though we don't have anything to worry about. So that's in a way. So depression is real, anxiety is real, mental illness is real, but mental health is not mental illness. So that's something I wanted to give as an overview before we move into the topic as well. On a side note, Muslims and depressed, this is something, it's my pet hate subject. Because many people, when we talk to Muslims in particular, they talk about this in a very different way. There's a lot of myths around Muslims in particular. Is depression and anxiety a sign of weak iman? Is depression a sign of weakness? Can Muslims be depressed? People ask this question very often. It's like asking me, can Muslims be having a heart attack? Can Muslims have a renal failure? Can Muslims have diabetes? Why don't we ask that question too? Why do we ask only when it comes to pertaining to mental health? That's something we need to look into it. So let's move on. Is it a sign of weak iman? There's a difference between situation, temporary distress, grief, upset, or sadness, and clinical depression. There's a significant difference, and we looked at that. There's neurochemical change, there's cerebral blood flow changes, and there's a metabolism. In the cerebral metabolism, there is a change in that as well. Depression is a mental health disorder that can affect the way you work, study, sleep, eat, and enjoy pleasurable activities. So we know that these are domains, there are spectrums around that. Is it a sign of weak iman? A depressive disorder is more than a passing mood. It's not just being socially upset about something. It's more than that, because it is something very pervasive. It stays that way for a few weeks. It's not a sign of personal weakness. It cannot be willed or wished away, because it's a change in the chemicals of the brain which triggers a certain mood. So this is very important topic, and there are many articles now coming up. As a Muslim, I wish people would stop telling me that I can just pray away my mental health problems. It's more than that. Often when a kid or an youngster, youth gets having some mental health issues, they're often taken to the Imam of the mosque, which is good. Ruqya and things like that should be done. Of course, it should be done if needed too. And then Imam, unfortunately, they don't understand, not every Imam, there are some Imams, mashallah, it's getting better now. But then they don't understand. What they say is, are you coming to mosque to pray? And the man is already feeling guilty and shame. He's not able to come to mosque because he's not even get alone, let alone he's leaving his bed to go to his main hall to have dinner with his family. And how could that kid can actually come to the mosque to do Jamaat, especially if we're expecting him to come on a winter morning for Fajr? And if he doesn't come, we say, okay, you're not doing this, so we're putting him more in distress. We talked about the aspects of depression. Motivation is a big problem. And they find it very retarded as well. And so that makes them more guilt, and then they become more shameful, and that's not going to help them. So as a Muslim society, especially the imams and the parents, they should understand this better to help their family members. When was the first modern psychiatric hospital was built? Now we are talking about modern psychiatric hospital. This was a few years ago when I came to know. It was astonishing. I was a trainee at that point, and it was astonishing. And I presented to my consultants and the department at that time. And some of them didn't agree, but some did. So it was in the 9th century. We are talking about modern psychiatry, not asylum centers. Even in UK, where I came from recently, it's still there. There are a couple of places. There's still asylum centers still existing, which is nothing short of being in a prison. That's how terrible it is. The first modern hospital was built in Baghdad, followed by several others throughout the Arab world, in Kahira, Damascus, which is soon followed it. By 13th century, we were pioneering with treatment in terms of mental health issues. So that's where we are as an ummah. Even if you Google it, this is the first search you would come up. You just have to type first modern psychiatric hospital. The first search result which comes up is Baghdad in 1918, and in Cairo later on. So that's where we are. As an ummah, we have regressed. We actually, our forefathers, they actually they understood the value of mental health, and they actually developed certain tools to match the mental health needs and demands to treat that condition in a very, very sophisticated way. They've joined both the acute medicine into mental health medicine, as we see it in most of the Australia now. But they've done it in the 9th century itself. But as an ummah, we regressed down to the level, now we are doubting whether even mental illness is still existing. That's a shame. So now we are moving on to the next topic, which is the topic of managing stress, faith-based principle, which is an Islamic perspective in this case. So I'll try to breeze it as quick as possible. So Islamic perspective is something which is, one would wonder, why should we take the religious perspective? Even if you look at many of the pundits in non-religious pundit, they also feel that people who have religious practices, faith-based principles and faith-based teachings have a role in dealing with their emotional health. So if we look at how Islam prepares us to face this world, then it makes a lot of sense. Some of them may already know this. Pardon me if it is too simple, but I thought I might just go through it. What is the word term dunya? Because we are in dunya at the moment. We're all in dunya. Dunya comes from the root word dani, which means basically low. We are at a low level. We came from higher level, which is the akhirah. We were all primordial state. We were floating around, and then we came around. And so we are all immigrant. We are all immigrated by Allah's will to this dunya from our great forefathers, Adam alayhi salam and Hawa alayhi salam. So that's how we are all immigrants to this dunya. So dunya is a low level. For example, metaphorically, if you look at it, if you're flying, now flying is a luxury at the moment because of COVID, but inshallah, when it opens up, if you're going to travel, then you have taken
Sorry, there's a technical issue there. We can't hear Dr. Sharif.
Low. We are in dunya. Dunya is the low level. So we are basically, all of us are in the economical state. So we can't expect a facility and a care which is being given by first-class passengers. Sorry, are we okay to go?
Yeah, now you're okay. You just froze for a few seconds.
Oh, I'm sorry. Okay, so this is what, if we look at the world in the prism that we are setting off very low, and if you're at the low level, then of course it can't be an ideal world. It can't be everything hunky-dory or happy and breezy. It's not possible. So that's the way Islam is trying to teach us. Islam is trying to prime our thought process. So this is the way forward. So it's preparation for us. So if you look in this prism, so if you look Surah 70 verse 19, Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, Innal insana khulika haluwa. So when Allah says this ayah, which means basically human beings are created in the state of anxiety, in the state of bubble, in the state of agitation. So Allah says that's how we have been created. So if we can identify, if we can understand our limits, our strength, then we can easily identify when it works better or not. So that's the whole process of it. Allah gives the answers for it. So, and that's 70 verse 19. And verse 20, the next verse, which says, Idal mashu sharru jazua, which means whenever harm afflicts them, they start to worry, they start to panic. And that's what happens, right? Every individual, we're always in a state of anxiety. And then when something affects us, we started to worry. And then 22, verse 22 says, there is an exception to it. What is the exception? Illal musallin, those who establish their ritual prayers, except those who establish the ritual prayers. It's fantastic, right? So Allah says, this is your creation, this is your composition. You're in a state of bubble, you're in a state of anxiety. And whenever something not what you want touches you, you become panicky. You can start worrying about it. But if people who are established the ritual prayers, for them, they don't do this way. These are beautiful study which happened by Andrew Newberg. He's in Philadelphia, and he and his colleagues from Thompson Jefferson University, they came up with this beautiful study. Yeah. So I'm just going to. So this came up with a beautiful study. They looked at the patients who observe, not patients, sorry, the volunteers who observe prayers. So they picked up 3 different types of Muslim candidates, and they looked into some brain scans. They put them in the transaxial SPECT scans, which is the neuroimaging scans which we talked about earlier, and they found a distinct variety when people do salah. Salah, we know, comes from the root word sila, which means connection. In this context, it means divine connection. So they came out with very, very beautiful observations. I'm going to hold on to the observation. I'm just going to move to the next one. We'll come back to this. The next one is, can we create God on demand, like movies on demand or food on demand by Ubers and things like that? Can we do that? And that's what one of the studies, these guys actually started when they studied, the Newberg and his colleagues, when they started this, the experimentation, they actually started with atheists. They started with atheists. They wanted to see. So they actually did their brain scanning at rest, brain scanning at rest. I'm just going to mute something. Okay, so specs. So they actually did the brain at rest and after contemplation. So if we look at this scan, this is the first scan of the atheist. So there's not much difference if you look at it. We remember that what we talked about, the red has to go through, which shows the metabolism increases and so. But this is not much of differentiation. The next one is somebody on the left, just below the atheist scan. If we look at here from my cursor, if you look at, this is somebody who is a believer, but he doesn't perform prayers. I'm talking about it's all talking about atheists, then we are talking about Buddhist way of praying and Christian way of praying. So the baseline scan doesn't show much, but when they do make meditation, you can see some changes in the frontal area of the brain, which is the focus area, the concentration area, things like that. So that area glows up a little bit more. So there is, and not only that, when they make prayers, they also talk through, and their language centers glow up as well. If you see the arrow there, there's a language center glows up as well. But then comes to the right side, just right side as below the man who's sitting and meditating. If you look at that scan, that's the brain of a nun, a Christian nun, who was praying in her life for 34 years every day. And so you can see that the changes are remarkable. She's praying, and you can see there's a lot of metabolic activity going on in the prefrontal area, the frontal areas, as well as the parieto-temporal and throughout. And when she makes the prayer, is after when she undergoes the prayer and puts through the same scan, then you can see that it happens more so in the prefrontal area and less so in the parieto temporal area, because they are getting more into the zone, and that's why they are getting a little, sometimes can lead to a little more focus into the God and derealizing a little bit on the area what they are. They're very transient. So then they looked at the Muslims. They divided the Muslims into 3 categories. 2 are Sufi Muslims, which they didn't do salah, but they do dhikr. They do superficial dhikr and they did intense dhikr. And the 3rd category, who actually did salah in an automatic state, which is not with intense, not with khushu. And the 3rd one, it did with khushu. So that's where they divided it. And this was the results of it. If you look at that, in the left-hand side, if you look at the left-hand side, this is the scan of the pre-prayer state of the Sufi. And post-dhikr, if you see the right side one. And the left side, again, this is again another. This is intense dhikr. This is superficial dhikr, but then there is intense dhikr. There's not much changes if you can see it's happening. It is still meditation, it is dhikr, but it is not making much difference. But here, an Imam was called, and he was asked to stimulate an automatic process, not to go through this mindful, intense with khushu. So the Imam was going through this pre-prayer state. That's how his brain is. If you see, there is more frontal metabolism happening, there is more activity going on in the brain. But when it happens to the intense salah, with khushu is again, it's difficult to quantify when somebody is being observed in the machine and things like that. But yet they saw some significant changes. The frontal, if you see the second arrow which comes from the right hand, what they are looking at is it's just behind the frontal area, which is the anterior cingulate cortex, and those areas are more stimulated. And if you look at the parieto-temporal region as well, more in the midbrain region and things like that, they are more glowing as well. So if you look at the left column showing the result of the scan of the first 2 field practitioners, and then the third one is the automatic salah practice of the third subject. And the right column shows the cerebral blood flow pattern during intense prayer for dhikr in the 2 Sufi practitioners, and the more intense form of salah in the third individual. In the third individual, they found there is an increased activity in the anterior cingulate gyrus. So what is anterior cingulate gyrus? Anterior cingulate gyrus, basically, it is a kind of a compartment between the prefrontal cortex, which is the thinking brain, and the emotional brain. So anterior cingulate cortex, which actually kind of modulates how our emotions are processed, how those emotions can be rationalized, how it could be reasoned. So it's a kind of a steers around. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is making when you do salah, in the way it has to be done, it is the anterior cingulate cortex which is more activated rather than the frontal region or in the parieto-temporal region. The parieto-temporal region is not well stimulated because we get into a state of surrender and submission. So we feel a bit of disorientation because that's where the orientation comes from, the parieto-temporal region. So then we go back to the first one. If you see this scan and this scan, you can see a marked difference. This is a nun who is praying 34 years, and this is an imam who is praying with intense salah. So what is the outcome they came up with? They said there were several unique characteristics of the Islamic prayers, particularly increased activity in the anterior cingulate, which strongly regulates emotions, and the caudate nucleus, which is the reward mechanism, which is part of the reward system as well. And Dr. Newberg said, our study raises big picture of questions about the similarities and differences of religious and spiritual practice. When they differ, is it because of the belief system or the way it is being practiced? So it's amazing. I believe it is due to both. So it is still in the preliminary stage. The power of the study is still very weak. However, there's a very interesting observation, which as a Muslims should actually make us to feel good about it and make our salah even more stronger. So this is what Allah says, verily in the remembrance of Allah, hearts do find peace. That's the neurotheology bit of it. And that's exactly what the observation of Dr. Newberg and their colleagues have identified to us. Cause-effect relationship, and Islam comes from the root word salam, which means surrender and peace and purity. What that actually means is surrendering submission and surrendering to the Allah, to the will of surrendering submission, our will, to the will of our Creator, to attain, to acquire inner peace and external harmony with the world. That's exactly what the Newberg's colleagues have said. Because when we surrender, when the Imam surrendered, the parieto-temporal regions activities also diminished because you surrender, you submitted. So the orientation level of the Imam went down as well. So some of the things which often leads to having more stress in our life and anxiety and things like that is often we call it as mind traps. What are these mind traps? Taking things very personally. And for example, we especially most of us are subcontinent people and Asians. We are very emotional people. We take things very easily personally. You don't need you don't need a lot to make it very personal. So sometimes when we ask somebody to come for a coffee, if that person can't make it, but he went to our neighbor, we make a big story out of it. We take it very personally and we don't call them again. So that's one of the mind traps. Don't take things personally. It's possible that that person is not available at that time, but he was available at a different time, which you then invited. And unrealistic expectations. We have this unrealistic expectations, especially with our families, with our extended relations and things like that. We expect them to know what we feel. And they're not magicians, right? We might think we've been living 20 years married, so she should know how I feel about it. No, that's not possible. Why can't we communicate that? It is Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has given insan the best ability to communicate. The communicate makes us human beings as well, how efficiently we can communicate. So unrealistic expectation is another mind trap. So we should express ourselves and make, and sometimes you have to demand it in the right way, rather than expecting them to understand how you or us feel about it. And sometimes rigid thinking, you would have heard about it, say either my way or no way. So rigid, very inflexible thinking. So when Isaac Newton was asked about what is intellect, so he said the intellect is the ability for an individual to adapt to new situations. So the adaptation, and Prophet ﷺ said in many of the hadiths, one of the biggest blessings of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is adaptation. And mashallah, most of us would have come to Australia, we got adapted with it. And so the adaptation comes naturally to us because of Allah's blessing on it. So rigid, inflexible thinkings are all makes us to mind trap. And that can cause some kind of stresses, which can cause undue stresses in our life. Some avoidable traits, pessimistic thinking. It's always thinking that there's only, if you have a half glass of water, you look at only the empty part of it, not the part where the water is in the glass. So always looking at what you don't have rather than appreciating what you have. So that leads to pessimistic thinking and not optimistic. And not optimism. And sometimes we self-critique a lot. We become very harsh and rude on ourselves. Even at times we feel our shadows are critiquing us. That's the way we become very hard on us. Sometimes people are over-analytical. They start to try to join the dots and end up over-analyzing and bringing more burden and stress to themselves and to their family. So these are some avoidable traits. If we have optimistic thinking, things could be better. And self-criticism is good, but to a degree. But if you over self-critique, then it drags your self-confidence and self-esteem, and you become an avoidant rather than proactive in things you want to do. How can we modify stress? This is very important. How can we modify the stress? We all have the stress. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala said, we are created you with stress. So how can we modify it? So reframe problems. Try to view stressful situation from a more positive perspective, rather than fuming about a traffic jam. Take it as an opportunity to pause and reflect, or you can even take the time for dhikr, rather than getting stressed about it. These are some things which you can't control. Look at the big picture. Take perspective of the stressful situation. Ask yourself how important it will be in the long run. Will it matter in a month, a year? Is it really worth getting upset over? If the answer is no, focus on your time and energy elsewhere. Adjust your standards. Perfectionism is good, but it is difficult. Perfectionism is purely with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. It's a trait of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. We can try and do our best ability, but stop setting yourself up for failure for demanding perfection. We have to do our best. Don't take me wrong. We have to strive and try to do our best. But best does not necessarily mean perfection. And set a reasonable standard for yourself and others, and learn to be okay with good enough. Take control. This is another aspect. Learn how to say no. Know your limits. Stick to them. We talked about this S is equal to stress is equal to pressure or demand, which is if it is over the resources, then it can put us in stress. So if somebody asks something to do, then you have to be in a position to say no by not saying no. That's something which I learned in UK very well. But how do we do that? If somebody asks you to do something and if you think you're not able to do it, at least give a proper consideration and ask them time. Can I come back to you? If we can make some juggle it around, we can juggle it around. But if we can't juggle it around, then make sure that we say no. But you don't have to be so saying no in an aggressive tone, but you can take your time. You say, look, I have considered your request. I looked into all options. Unfortunately, I've been double booked already. I'm not in a position this time to help you, but hopefully next time I can do it. But don't say, I'll come back to you, inshallah, and not going back to it. Because inshallah is one of the most abused words by Muslims. We say inshallah and take it for granted. And alhamdulillah, we are good at work because of the work consequences. But in social and in community relationship, there's something which I've noticed often. Distinguish between should and must. Often we look should and the must at the same category, which is not the case. Must is obligatory. Should is recommended. It is good, but not obligatory. It is, for example, you have to have your passport to travel in the flight. Now it is all, you need to have vaccine passport as well. But you must need ticket as well, but you can go to airport and then purchase the ticket there. So you must need the ticket. So should and must is something different, and we have to categorize it when must takes the priority and not the should. Limit people who stress you out. If someone consistently causes stress in your life, limit the amount of time you spend with that person. Once a sister asked me, my husband stressed me out. But then what I have to tell her? I told her, you have to talk to my wife. And she would say more stories about me. But that's life, isn't it? We have to be mutually respectful and try and help as much as we can. But nevertheless, unfortunately, we end up stressing some of our close family members, which we shouldn't do. Take control of your environment. If the evening news makes you anxious, turn off the TV. We are not going to change the world, are we? By looking at the television. If the traffic makes sense, it'll take a longer but less traveled route. At least we can look at a different scenario, different topography, and appreciate the nature Allah has blessed us with. So these kind of things, take control of things. In fairness, in life, we can have only 18 to 20% of things which is under our control. Majority of things, over 80% of things, are not under our control. So the successful people are people who take whatever in their control and do their maximum advantage, take them to their maximum advantage. So those are the people who become successful in life with Allah's permission. Be content with what you have. This is important. Be content. Emptiness. People come up with it, hey, I feel empty. I feel that I'm no one here. I feel there's nothing happening around me. And there's a beautiful hadith where Prophet ﷺ said, and Abu Hurairah narrated, look at those who are below you, not those who are above you, so that you will not think little of the blessings that Allah has bestowed upon you. Look at the pessimistic thinking. We talked about the half glass full and half glass empty. This is what it is. Look at what you have and look at people below you, and not look at people above you and think and starting to become ungrateful to Allah for the blessings He has bestowed on us. Mind over matter. The Prophet ﷺ asked his companion, who among do you consider a strong man? They replied, the one who defeats so and so in a wrestling contest. He said, no, that's not so. A strong man is the one who can control himself when he's angry. In Sahih Bukhari and Sahih Muslim. So that's very important. So that's a wisdom. It's not about the strong person is containing himself when he's at rage. You know, the anger is one letter less than danger. So if you put D in front of anger, it becomes danger. So that's how dangerous it is. And Rasul Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam said it in a very, very easy way for us to understand it. In fact, staying patient and calm is key to physical strength. Now neuroscience is teaching us that staying calm at the time of rage is a sign of physical strength. Not only cognitive strength, but also physical strength. Amazing, right? Stop grudging, start forgiving. That's one of the other things we can get away from stress. Learn to forgive. Accept the fact that we live in an imperfect world and that people make mistakes. You know, we are in dunya. Dunya is an imperfect, which is a low level. It just has a lot of deficits and imperfectness. It's not an ideal world. So we are living in an ideal world. If we look at the world in this prism, it makes life much more simple. And that people make mistakes. So we need to forgive. And we make mistakes and we ask for forgiveness. So if we do that to our Creator, we should do the same to our fellow creatures as well. Let go of anger and resentments. Free yourself from negative energy by forgiving and moving on. We can't move on until we forgive and forget it. If you don't forgive it, you can't forget it. And if you don't forgive and forget it, we can't move on. 3 A's golden principle to avoid stress is avoid. Wherever you can avoid it, you can avoid it. If you can't avoid it, you negotiate and you alter it. And if you can't avoid, you can't alter, then accept it. Otherwise, you get into a conflict zone and you're going to waste and you're going to burn out a lot of neuronal calories, which is going to make your life more miserable. So either avoid, if you can, you do it. If you can't, you try and avoid it. If you can't avoid it, negotiate and alter it to your potential where you can actually do it. If not, accept it and do it. To accept it, don't try to control the uncontrollables. There are certain uncontrollables, we can't control it. So you just accept it. Do not be discouraged or grieved. You alone have true dignity if you're only true believers. Warning from Quran. And certainly, Allah says in the Quran very clearly, He's preparing us. He says, certainly we shall test you with something of fear, hunger, loss of wealth, lives, and resources, and give glad tidings to the patient ones. Allah says, we're going to test you because the world is for the test. We are here for the test. We have emigrated from up to downstairs, which is the dunya, so that we are going through each one of us are going through a test. So according to the outcome of this test, we'll be scored in Yawm al-Qiyamah to go back where we came from. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is preparing us for potential challenges. It's called as neuronal priming. He's priming our neurons so that we can be in align, so that when challenges happens, we'll be able to accept it. Because acceptance is the key. When you accept it, you normalize it. When you normalize it, it simplifies things and you can work around it. Life is a test. The life was never meant to be perfect. And we have created man in a toil and struggle. It's in distress. Allah has created it that way. So we have to understand our limitations, and looking at our limitations and working around our limitations brings us, improves our strength in life. Stress modifiers further. You can use a stress diary where you can put up all the things which brings you stress, and that can give you a pattern. So these are the areas which actually makes me stressful. So how can I modify it? So having a diary and working around it gives you a pattern, and that pattern can help you to modify it. And take control of things where you can take, if you can do things today, do it today. Don't leave it for tomorrow. And try to manage your time as effective as possible. If you have a daily routines and things like that, they can make our stress much more better. And lastly, work smarter, not harder. And 4 Ds, delete, do, delegate, or differ. Like the same thing we say, anything you can avoid, you avoid. If you have to do today, do today. If you can delegate it, if you find the right people, delegate it. But by delegating, it just doesn't assume everything will be done. But we need to eyeball it, we need to supervise it, we need to take them through that task as well. And if you can defer it, defer it. These are effective time management tips as well. And this is amazing. This is the most positive thing from any divine scriptures I have gone through. Verily, with every difficulty, there is relief. With every challenge, there is opportunity. So this is amazing. So whenever a challenge comes, whenever a difficulty comes, Allah says, I promise us this. With difficulty, it doesn't stay with difficulty. There is a relief coming after. There is ease coming after. So what is the opportunity in this challenge? Allah makes us to be very positive thinking. He wants us to be looking for opportunities in challenging circumstances. That's amazing. In 94, 5, and 6. SMART goals, to be talked to SMART, which is specific, measurable, attainable, realistic, and timely. For example, if you want to do something before 2022 kicks in, for example, you want to memorize, for example, you want to memorize 10 ayahs of Surah Al-Baqarah. So you make a specific, this is the 10 ayahs, and it has to be measurable. What do you know you're going to do with 10 ayahs, and is it attainable? Maybe you should make sure that this is done in a timely fashion. Maybe you need to take it 3 weeks rather than 3 days. It depends. Some people can do that. So it has to be realistic. The goal has to be realistic, which suits our abilities and and we need to know what is our boundaries are. And it has to be timely. So after 3 weeks, you're not able to do it, you go back and relook it and review it. So that's something called SMART goals. And when in this type of challenging time, Allah says, who you believed, seek help through patience and prayer. Indeed, Allah is with those in Allah Mahsabri. Allah is with those who are patient. In chapter 2, verse 153. So this is the last slide, I think. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in chapter 29:20, Allah says, travel in the land and see how Allah originated creations. And then Allah bring forth the creation of the hereafter. Verily, Allah is able to do all things. So not to be like mindful, our minds preoccupied and full of all this junk stuffs, but to be clear and to be more thought processed. So where we actually walk through, we can actually understand and appreciate Allah's creation and the blessings He gives us. We become thinkers when we look at Allah's creations and things like that, rather than preoccupied and messed up inside of different things. So to be mindful, not be mindful with double hand. So in summary, a balanced life between time for work, relationship, and relaxation and fun, your closeness to your Creator at the level of observance of fulfilling His commandments. That's the key bit. Balance. And then the next one is the closeness to the Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and how mindful we are observing and fulfilling Allah's commandment. And the resilience to hold up under pressure and meet challenges head on. Stop stressing, start living. There's no evil one we can do without hurting ourselves first. And there's no good we can do without benefiting ourselves first. And that ends my talk. This is the true health. So the mind, body, and the ruh. So these are the three areas. To get the ruh health, we have to use faith-based principles. That's one of the reasons this talk is all about. And I stop it here. And thank you, Jazakallah khairan, for listening.
Jazakallah khair, Dr. Umar Sharif, for this beautiful talk. I think our brothers and sisters who are attending this session, they have some understanding of stress, anxiety, and depression, and how mind works in terms of stress. I think another thing that we learned from this beautiful presentation was what are the beautiful and healthier impacts of religious practices, including prayer and zikr on our mind. And you also spoke in detail about some of the tips to manage stress and to develop this mental resilience that will help us in times of stress. That's a beautiful talk. I think another very important go-home message is that while religion has a very, very important aspect, very important contribution towards a person's mental health and his spiritual health, and you also spoke about it, apart from that, when we in psychiatry, we use biopsychosocial model, and that means when we look into the reasons of possible causes of a mental disorder, or similarly, when we try to treat the person with mental disorders, we look into the physical aspects of that disorder, what could be the psychological aspects, and what are the social factors that contribute to the mental disorder. That could be unemployment, abuse, relationship issues. Religion is a very important aspect of the social part of this psychosocial model. So while religion has a very important impact on a person's mental well-being, Muslims and practicing Muslims can also have mental disorders, just like any other physical illness. So it's not a matter of a weakness of your faith, of your Imaan. A very religious person, a practicing Muslim, can also have mental health issues. So this is a fact, a very important go-home message. The other message is that while it is very important to practice all these religious beliefs and guidelines, but when a person feels like this is too, the stress, the mental stress and mental pain is too overwhelming for them, and they're not able to deal with that on their own, then it is the time to seek professional help. And I think this is also a very important message while we're having a beautiful panel of are renowned psychiatrists. So when you feel like you can't deal with it on your own, then it is time to seek professional help. We have a few questions from our audiences as well, and I would like Dr. Umar Sharif to answer those as well. The first question was, depression and mental health, as you also mentioned, is a taboo in Muslim communities especially. So what can we do to make people talk about these issues and encourage them to talk about it and then to seek help?
Thank you. That's a brilliant question. And thanks to Dr. Zawaria. You summarized it very well. Thank you for the talk. You summarized for a take-home message. It's really good. So the question is, how do we actually make our community more aware? With regards to mental illness in particular, the mental health in particular, the question is, most of the time, the imams and the elders of the family, they have a very large role in expressing their opinions or making a directive towards seeking what's the next step towards how to go about it. I feel it's very important as IMA, as an organization, we need to work with some of the ulama, some of the imams of the mosque, and we need to make them able to understand what is mental health and how mental illness is different from mental health and how depression could be real. Of course, by having a good Iman, it reduces the vulnerability, but it is not an absolute proof to not to have any mental illness or mental health conditions. So that's something we need to actually make it in principle, make them to understand that's the principle. So that's one of the things we need to talk about. The second one is people should, people, especially the parents and the elders, they should know that it is an organ. Mind is in the brain, and brain is an organ. And we have seen it can have changes, structural changes. It can have some genetic susceptibility. It can have some chemical imbalances in the brain. And there are other reasons like prolonged stress and things like that. So these can have an effect. So they need to be open to talk around it. They need to actually, if their kids, for example, or any family members come to talk to them, they have to acknowledge it. Like they would acknowledge if somebody says, I have a pain in my chest, they would take it very seriously, right? So that's the way it has to be taken. Rather, if I say, I feel very down in myself, I feel hopeless, I'm not sure whether I'm a proper Muslim now, then there is a need to someone to sit and talk to them. It's not that they're becoming possessed by jinn and things like that. I haven't seen anyone, but there is a concept. I'm not saying it's not there, but it's not like possessed state or anything. It can go through. It's an organ at the end of the day. So we have to make them to understand depression is like any other condition, can happen to any individual. So that's something we need to talk to them around. And we also have to make them to imams, especially to understand when they can actually apply the ruqya and how can they talk to the person who is suffering from mental illness. A choice of words, how they talk around it, not to increase their guilt and shame and navigate them in this difficult time. So it is important, as you said, biopsychosocial. The psychosocial aspects are the key. Chemicals are relatively very low in the order of the hierarchy in terms of the indications. But the family can help them to support them. We see many people, when they come out of the depression, they talk, my family was with me. They were able to help me. So that's why I became stronger. If something doesn't kill us, it's going to make it stronger. So that's what the theory is. So if we can actually work along it, especially in mosque, there should be some kind of GP surgeries, where what I mean is, sorry, it's not GP surgeries, mental health surgeries, where the imams actually have those kind of talk with the psychiatrist or psychologist or even hospital chaplains. They have a lot of psychological mindedness. They have a lot of psychological tools. They have to work together. It's not one person's job. It's a team. We need to work around it so that in the society able to understand the impact of mental health. The burden is too huge, especially as Muslim youth who is growing up in the Western world at this current time. they are facing different complex issues at multiple levels. So it is important for them to have this ventilated, very safe environment created at mosque, so that they can come and open and we can talk around it. Even if they have some kind of homophilic orientation and things like that, they can come and talk to it. It's not that that's haram and things like that. So you can have that, but this is how it is. There is a way around it, and guiding them, signposting them to the right people. So those things, the mechanism need to be put in place. And hopefully in future, we are the people who build the modern psychiatric institutions. So we should be able to get over it soon if we all work together. Inshallah.
Yes, so very important. So it is about collaborating with the community, working for mental health and educating community in general and community leaders such as imams in particular about mental health issues and how to approach them and how to work in collaboration with professionals. And also as an individuals, I guess, what I learned from you is to provide that safe space to our family and our youth to talk about the mental health issues, and they can come up and talk to us. So that was very enlightening. The other questions are very similar, and I'm going to ask them together. What are the things that would strengthen the interface between spirit and mind? Sometimes, especially in the very, very busy and working life of Australia, and with very limited social support, it is hard to balance the mind, body, and spirit interface. And the other question is, what are the best ways to develop this mental resilience in addition to Salah? I think you spoke in detail about it, but if you want to add some additional comments to these questions.
Yeah, thank you. That's beautiful questions, inshallah. So I think the Sunnah, we have to go back to the Sunnah. The best person ever lived in this world is Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, and the prophets are the best people in terms of wisdom and character and nobility. So we have to go back to their Sunnahs, and we have to work around it, the way they ate, the way they slept, the way they did their day-to-day habits and behaviors. One of the things which I find among the Muslim community is the sleep. So I'll come to the dietary habits a little later, but the sleep to begin with. Sleep is, Prophet Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam said, go to sleep after Isha, don't waste your time. So we are talking about going to bed at 8:30, 9 o'clock, but very rarely Muslim society at large. There are people doing it, but at large isn't going, because the melatonin, if the melatonin secretion, if you look at the secretion, the curve starts to come around 8:30 p.m. and they go away by 3:45. Around 3 a.m. it goes out of the system. And there are many people who go to bed at 12 in midnight or 1 a.m. By the time they get into the non-REM phase of sleep and things like that, the melatonin is gone. So they are being deprived of melatonin. If you're not sleeping well, if you don't have a healthy sleep hygiene, the glymphatic system, the glymphatic activities of the glial cells, which actually works in terms of detoxing the brain. When we sleep, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has set a beautiful apparatus to detox our brain. And if you don't sleep in the regular sleep hours, the melatonin is not secreted because it's light sensitive. So it's only at the dark hours. No matter how much you sleep during the day, we can't actually compare with the nocturnal sleep. Nocturnal sleep is far superior. And to compensate for a lost nocturnal sleep, the scientists say you need at least 7 days sleep. So that basically leads into a sleep debt. So sleeping on time, not to just watching with the multi-stimulus, in multi-sensory stimulation through phones, YouTubes and things like that, and going to bed quicker, going to bed early, and waking up for tahajjud is the way to begin with. And then the dietary habits and things like that as well. Prophet Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam said, keep 1/3, 1/3, 1/3. Eat for 1/3 and drink for 1/3 and keep empty for 1/3. So these are the things which is improved. And we know from keeping the stomach a little bit empty, it helps with what we call it as the hunger hormone, ghrelin. That's hunger hormone, which is neuroscientists now they are talking about how the hunger hormone impacts on the hippocampus, which is where the long-term memories are being consolidated in our brain. So how ghrelin helps with the neurogenesis in that particular part of the brain. So those things are actually having a lot of a role in it, and having the the Sunnah fasting, the Sunnah song, Monday and Thursday. Now, all the Michael Morrisseys and things like that, they have come up with this intermittent fasting and things like that. So what we are knowing now is been already applied in Sunnah a long time ago. And the Sunnah foods and things like that, which are very, very, very rich in minerals, which are very rich in micronutrients and vital amines and things like that. So those things come into play as well. And then keeping the social cohesion, going to Salah, going to the mosque. Of course, we can't do it in the lockdown time. When it's open, inshallah, it will be open soon. Then we can keep the Jamaat going and things like that. That kind of keep charging ourselves to one another as well, to keep the mind ruh interface and things like that. It is a package. It is not just a unidirectional. It is not very homogeneous. It is very heterogeneous as well. And it's very lenient.
Thank you. Another question is, are group therapies equally effective as one-on-one sessions?
What's that?
Are group sessions, group therapies are equally effective as one-on-one sessions?
It depends on the conditions as well, I think. Yeah, it depends on the condition in particular. Some people have difficulty to uncover certain things about their personal things in front of a group. So that might put them under extreme demanding stress and things like that. That can make them to be avoided and not to be compliant with the group principles and therapy modules. So it depends. It is effective in certain things, in social anxiety disorders and things like that. There are some group therapies have been helpful, but in per se, one-to-one is often helpful. But the problem is psychologists are very, almost a rare species at this time. We are not getting the psychological help as we should get in this Western world. So unfortunately, due to that, it becomes more and more of group therapies. But group therapy, it depends on the group dynamics and who actually coordinates, who actually chairs the therapy itself. So if the person is able to be very didactic, gives the space for them to have this conversation, and you have the similar minded people within that group as well, then group therapy should be effective, but not for every condition, of course.
Thank you, Dr. Umar Sharif.
Yeah,
thank you, Dr. Umar Sharif, for the beautiful talk and also for the beautiful comments and suggestions. And I'm hoping that our audiences, our brothers and sisters, also learned a lot from this session. Now, for the concluding remarks, I'm going to invite Dr. Nader Hafiz, who's the mastermind behind this session. He arranged all today's session and all the things behind it. Dr. Nader Hafiz is a consultant psychiatrist, and he works in both private and public sectors. He's a member of Royal Australian and New Zealand College of Psychiatry in special interest groups of intellectual and developmental disability and neuropsychiatry section. Dr. Nader Hafiz. Dr. Nader, can you please unmute your mic?
Sorry, can you hear me now? Sorry.
Yes,
Yeah,
now we
okay.
can.
Now I can. So Dr. Rashid, thank you very much for the lovely, very informative talk. I hope people benefited from it. It was really needed in this time, in the times of lockdown, and it came at the right time. I really appreciate your time for that. In addition to Dr. Umar Sharif, who gave us time and enlightened us with all the psychiatric aspects and the spiritual aspects of stress, anxiety, and depression. I thank our Nisat I'm a team, Dr. Asif Raza, Dr. Kaloon from Canberra, Dr. Javeer Shaib, and Dr. Sama Manir was in the background, and also the technical team who managed this talk. Thank you, I really appreciate it. We'll be doing some more talks, inshallah, in the future, and we would like the audience to give us some feedback and let us know what are the topics that we want to discuss and they want to know about, and we will just inshallah manage that inshallah in the future. Thank you very much.
Jazakallah khair, Dr. Nader Hafiz, and Jazakumullah khairan kaseera everyone for joining us tonight. Let's end this session with the dua of Khatm Majlis. Subhanakallahumma wa bihamdika nashhadu an la ilaha illa anta nastaghfiruka wa natubu ilayk. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.
Thank you very much, Dr.